Welcome to part 12 in our series of videos on how to create a simple purchase order system using Blazor and C#. In this video, we'll add some more data validation using data annotations and also add some business logic to ensure that a supplier is selected in the order header and similarly product and tax rates on the order lines. We'll also be linking the product drop-down list to the selected supplier and prevent the supplier being changed once order lines have been selected. Anyway, let's have a look at the code and get started. We'll start with the data annotations. And as we've seen in previous videos, data annotations has three basic steps. If I look at the PO header, I've already made the code changes needed here, but the data annotations requires, first of all, that we put a requirement on the field names, such as string length and an error message that we want to be displayed. So that's the first thing. And as you can see, I've just put error messages on here saying that the string length is 50 and I have a warning that it's got a maximum length if they run into a problem there. The only other thing that I've added here that wasn't in here originally is a requirement for email address. Email address can be validated simply by putting in square brackets email address above the declaration, and I've added error message invalid email address format. The one thing that I couldn't find was anything to do with dates. I had thought of adding a requirement that we should put a range of dates requirements in here, so that, for example, the order date shouldn't be, for example, plus or minus today's date by 30 days or something like that. But sadly, I couldn't find anything, so I'm letting that one pass for the moment. So these are the changes I've made on the order header. On the order line, very little additional. I've got an error message on the required field, and I've got a string length. Its maximum was set to 50. I've added a minimum of 2 and a suitable error message. So that's the first stage of using data annotations. The second stage is on the page itself. What we need to do is, this is the purchase order page, and it consists of an edit form for the purchase order header, and at the top here I need to add in data annotations validator. So that will check it, check those requirements. But if we want those bespoke error messages to appear, we need to add those as well. So let me put in the validation message. So we've got it on address 1, address 2, address 3, postcode and email. So that's it for this one. Let me just copy that and I'll add it to address line 2 and amend it to bring in the message. Address line 3, postcode, and email address. I think those are the ones. Yep, that's right. And on the purchase order line, we want that under in the dialog, the Syncfusion dialog. So this is the grid, the dialog for the description here. Now, you'll see here that the product description is in its own div with the class of flex container, which we've got defined further down in the style here, and you'll see that the flow direction is row, which means that if we don't do anything else, if we add the error message in here, it'll put it alongside the product description, and I want it to appear below the description. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enclose it in its own class div, and I'm going to put the error message there. So that should appear on the row below the product description if they put in a description of less than 2 characters or more than 50, or indeed leave it blank. Those are the fields that we're going to use data annotations on. At a later stage in the order line dialog, I want to restrict the product drop-down that we've got here to products that are linked to the supplier that we've already selected in the purchase order header. But at the moment, there's nothing to prevent the user from adding order lines without selecting a supplier first. The Syncfusion drop-down list documentation had some information on how to validate drop-down values, but I didn't really have very much success with that. So I've decided instead to use C# code to check the drop-down list data. And to ensure that a supplier has been selected before we add order line, I'm going to add some code to the toolbar handler that opens the order line dialog. And to do this, we can reuse the warning component that we've already used. I think it was on the product and supplier, and just amend the error messages to give us what we want. So the first thing to do is to add the component, the Blazor component for the warning message. So I'll just make a bit of space down here, and I've got it here. So that's the line of code we need. Warning page. It's got a reference of warning. It's got a warning header message of that, and a warning content message of that. So these 3 items need declaring. So I'll declare those up here somewhere. And to save a bit of time, I can bring that in. So that'll have all those declared. And the next stage is to set it up. Now, to implement this, the code that handles adding the order lines needs to check whether a supply has been selected. So let's find the toolbar handler, and it's here. So what we're going to do is, if it says add, we're going to check that the Syncfusion dialog box has got a supplier in it, and if not, it'll throw up a warning message. So let's throw that in there. I can now get rid of that. So what this is saying is it's checking that a supply has been selected from the drop-down list. So if the PO supplier ID equals 0, which it will be if no one has selected it, it's going to throw up the warning dialog with warning, please select a supply before adding order lines, or else it's going to be doing what we normally do, creating a new purchase order line and setting some defaults, and then opening the dialog add edit order line. So that should check that we've got a supplier there. So let's just try that. So I'll save everything and run it. So I select that. Now if I try adding a line, it should say please select a supplier, and it does. So that looks good. Okay, so I've got a few of these hanging around. I'll close those and go back. So we want to use a similar technique to ensure that a product and tax code is selected in the dialog to add edit order lines. We can use exactly the same kind of logic on the open dialog. Now I can use the same logic on the save action of the dialog. So order line save. So what we're going to do here is add in the code to check that a product has been selected and a tax code has been selected. So if I put that in here, actually I want to create a blank line first. So it's checking that a product has been selected. So if the product code is null or the product code is an empty string, it's going to display the dialog, the warning dialog with those messages. And if not, it'll check that tax rate has been selected. And then we want an else in here. So just recapping, when we're trying to save an order line, it'll check that a product has been selected. If not, it'll display the warning dialog. It'll then check that a tax code has been selected, and if not, it'll show the dialog. Otherwise, it'll go ahead and actually save the order line as we've done before. So let's give that a go. So same old thing, I'll try and select it, no select a supplier. I select a supplier, I could now add that, but if I put something in here, if I try saving that, it says please select a product. And if I save it without entering a tax rate, please select a tax rate. And it's clearing it. I don't want it to do that. What have I done wrong? I think I've got these in the wrong place. That's what's happening. I think that needs to be down here somewhere. Right, let's try it again. So I selected the product, that was okay. But I didn't select the tax rate. So now if I try saving it, please select tax rate, that's what I want. And it doesn't clear the form, which is exactly what I want. So that's fine. That is now working as I wanted it to. Right, let's go back to the code. So the next stage, as I mentioned earlier, is proposed to limit the product drop-down list in the dialog to those products associated with the supplier selected in the order header. Once order lines have been entered, We therefore need to prevent the user going back to the order header and changing the supplier. To do this, whenever an order line is saved, the supplier drop-down list will be disabled. The knock-on consequence is that if all order lines are deleted, then the supplier drop-down list should be re-enabled, but I think that's for another day. So at the top of the code section, we want to declare a Boolean to say whether the supplier is enabled or not. So where's the suitable place? Doesn't really matter. Let's have it under here. And so we've now got a Boolean called supplier enabled. And we're going to be setting that to true or false. It's starting off as true. And if we save some order lines, we're going to set it to false. But first of all, on the actual supplier drop-down box, drop-down list, at the moment we've got enabled equals true, and we want that to be set to our supplier enabled Boolean. So that's true at the moment, but when we add any order lines, we want it to be set to false. So if we go to the order line save method, order line save, here we are, and if that's successful, we want to set that Boolean to be false. So we'll just add that down here. So we've now got order lines, so prevent the user from changing the supplier. So as is traditional, let's try running that and check that it works. So I select the supplier. I'll just add one order line. And we should see that get disabled, which it does. So that bit's working. So once the user has got an order line in here, they can't go back here and select a different supplier. But what we haven't done yet is we aren't limiting that to products for Aardvark stationary supplies. If we look at Aardvark stationary supplies, or other products, we look who the supplier is. Aardvark is only supplying A4 and DL250s. So we want to limit it to just those two products. Let's close this, go back to the code. So to do this is, let's close those. On the product service, what we've got at the moment is we've got product insert, product list, and that gets all the products, and we've got product get one. And we're passing into that the product ID. So we want a kind of combination of these two, which gets the produces an IEnumerable. It gives us a list effectively, but we want to pass into it the supplier ID. So let me give you a bit of space, and this is what we want here. So what we're doing is a task of IEnumerable product, and I've called it product list by supplier. and I'm passing in the integer of the supplier ID. So we'll see how this works later, but it's going to use a new stored procedure called SP product list by supplier. So we need to change that, and we also need to change the iProduct service to add effectively a duplicate of this, but product by supplier, and passing in the supplier ID. Let's save that. Now, on the product service, we want a new stored procedure for bringing back products listed by supplier. I think I've already got that in place, but let's just check. So I'll open SQL Server Management Studio. Yes, I've already got this here. So if I modify it, you'll see what the code is. So I'm using purchase orders, and this is the stored procedure product by product underscore list by supplier, and I'm passing in as a parameter the supplier ID, and I'm selecting the product ID, code description, unit price, supplier ID, and product is archived from the product table, where, and this is the important bit, the product supplier ID is the parameter supplier ID being passed in, but I don't want archive product. So I'm saying product is archived, it's set to 0, which is effectively false. But I've also added in where the product supplier ID is 0, i.e. is one of our generic products, and it's also alive, not archived, or the product supplier ID is null. I don't anticipate that would happen, but just in case it is, I want those returned. And just to check that this will work, we can actually run the stored procedure. And I can say 1. I know the supplier ID, we have one for 1. Click OK. And I get 3 products returned. I get A1, A4, and DL250. So that's fine. The stored procedure works, but that code is what you need. But the final part of this is that we go back to our code, and on the Razor page, we've currently got the products getting the product list being populated on initialized. So here we've got products and it's getting the whole product list. We don't want that, so I'll just comment that out. I'll probably delete that later. But what I do want is something similar when we change the supplier method. So when we change the supplier, it's going to change the product list. So it's on change supplier. Change product, on change tax. Oh, where's on change supplier? Here we are. It doesn't really matter where we put it. Right, I'll just bring in the code that we want. And so it's going to await the product service, product list by supplier, and it's going to bring back using the argument item data supplier ID. But one other thing we need to do is to make that an async task. And that should sort that out. So that, having made that change, when the supplier changes, it'll change the list of products that are available in the dialog box. So a quick test of that. So select Aardvark, for example, and now our product list is limited to the 3 products. One that hasn't got a supplier, and A4 and DL250, which we know come from Aardvark. So that seems to be all working fine. I'll close these tabs. Go back to the code. Now, one of the comments that I had in a previous video was asking about putting totals at the bottom of the order line grid. So we can do that, I say, relatively easily. There's a lot of code, but it's not that difficult. Right, so here we are, here's the grid columns. And what we want to do is add in here some aggregates. And it's all this lot. So there's a lot of code, but it's not doing very much. So very at the innermost level, we've got this. So we're saying, right, the column is the net price. I'm putting totals under the net price, the tax amount, and the gross price. And in each case, they're sums. In each case as well, the format is C2 for currency with two decimal places. And you'll see here that I'm giving it a context here, net context, tax context, gross context, and the variable aggregate is gross context as the aggregate template context, and then we're summing it. It looks a bit strange, but it works. And again, we'll show that in a minute. But there was one other thing I wanted to correct. When I was going through this testing things earlier, I spotted that when I changed, for example, the quantity, the calculation was being carried out for the net price. But what I changed on one occasion was the unit price. And lo and behold, I discovered that I wasn't carrying out the PO line calc. So on the dialog, in the dialog, where is the dialog? Here it is. On the, can't see it now, I'm looking for it. Right, on quantity, we've got this on focus, and we're calling the PO line calc. But on the unit price, I'm not. So I need to add in there that. And now when the unit price is changed, the calculation should take place. So let's save everything and give everything a test. So I select a supplier. I'm going to stick with Aardvark and add a product. So when I click tab here, it'll recalculate the net price. And now if I change that to be 4, that changes the net price. I choose the tax rate and that changes. I save it. Let's add another product. I'll add 10 of those, leave the price, standard rate, save, close. And now you see we first of all can't change the supplier, and we've got the 2 lines here with a total at the bottom. So I think that's probably as far as I want to go today in this video. Um, we aren't out of the woods yet. We've still got, when I click save, it's saving the header here, but we're not saving the order lines. And that's going to be the topic for the next video. So thank you very much for watching. As usual, I'll put links in the description to the Blazor Code website, where you can find a description of what we've done in this video together with the relevant code. So thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to preparing the next video for you.